Right, what we'll do today is go over a Taz, for the most part, in Siman Tzadik Gimel, Hilchos Basar בחלב. Before we go into Tzadik Daled, which is already a whole different area, I decided there's a long Taz, a very interesting Taz that brings back some memories from Taaruvot. And even though some of the halachas are nogea elsewhere in Shuchan Aruch, in Hilchos Yain Nesach, by wine, they're nogea a little bit in Melicha, it's good to get a little bit of an understanding about the sugya of kavush. That's what we're going to be dealing with kavush. Kavush is an interesting area. Kavush is a different kind of mechanism by which absorption can take place. After all, we're not concerned here about Taaruvot of Isser v'Heter per se. We're concerned here about Blias, which is also a Taaruvot, but it's a different form of Taaruvot. Ultimately, we have to come on to Bittul, of course, either way. However, regardless of the situation, if you want to permit something that may have some sort of mamashos or tam of any sort from any source, you still may have to come on to Bittul. But the mechanism by which blias occur, one way, is through heat. That is what the one we're more accustomed to. That's Isser and Heter were either cooked together, or Isser was cooked in a pot. And now we're cooking Heter in that pot. So they're not being cooked at the same time. Nevertheless, we have to deal with the blias. And as we've explained before, in going into the sugya of tam ke'ikar, that the blias, the tam, is just as much of a problem as the real Isser itself. Except that the tam has one advantage, some of the time, and that is if it's after 24 hours. Being in a kli for a certain amount of time, according to some it's linas laila, just a night, overnight, it may be sufficient to render the tam in the kli pogum. So even though it's treif, even though it's aser, even though it's as aser as it could be, whether it's basar b'chalav together, whether it's nevelas and treifas, tmeyas, whatever, it's all the same. Nois and tam lefgam renders it not a problem. Lechatchila, I can't cook in such a pot, obviously. I have to make a gala if possible, or libum, whatever is required. But the question is, of course, b'di'evet. So b'di'evet, I have here a sort of situation where I can rely on this fact, that if a light went by, and there's perhaps some other heter, then we could be mitzaref that heter with the shita that holds that linas laila is sufficient to be poigim. Otherwise, we hold you need a me'es le'es. You do need 24 hours to be poigim. All right, so we spoke already a little bit about tam lefgam, how that can come about. There's various halachas on how to undo the tam lefgam, which we'll talk about later on in Basar b'chalav too. But there's no doubt that one can actually benefit from this.
What did you mean by?
For example, double chorif, undoing, canceling the effect, canceling the effect.
That it becomes Isser.
It becomes us. It reverses it. Yes, thank you. Right. So in going through Hilchos Basar b'chalav and in Hilchos Taaruvos and in other areas, we also come across different kinds of kelim. Different kinds of kelim, klei cheres, klei zchuchis, glass, earthenware, metal. And sometimes the processes in these kelim are different. Obviously, if you cooked two items together, regardless of the kli that you use, you're cooking them because heat is being used here to bring about tam into the other. In other words, the tam of Isser into the heter. So regardless of where you're actually cooking them together, it's not going to make a difference. But the material of which the keli is made does make a difference in Isser v'Heter. It makes a difference. For example, let's say you want to use barrels of yain, of goyim, right, that have absorbed somehow, not through heat. They have absorbed the wine that is aser, and you want to use it now to make liquor. Right? So we spoke briefly about the issues with sherry, right? Sherry. That's how you pronounce it. Sherry. Yeah. Or any of the wines that are soaked or stored, I should say, in such barrels. Whiskey, yeah, exactly. That's one, and that's part. It seems to be that's part of the problem with kalua that is bottled in this country, as opposed to kalua the Mexican coffee liquor that is produced and bottled in Mexico does not have a problem. The bottling process, in other words, where they actually store it and where they actually put it, regardless of their intention, if they do it intentionally to get additional flavorings from those barrels, that's not the point. The point is, these are barrels that were used for things that are not kosher. But the processes there are through tzoinen. Okay? No heat involved. Because if there's heat, there's no difference how you do it, where you do it, what material the keli is made out of when heat is involved. But when other processes are involved, the material possibly can make a difference, especially when things are put together for a certain amount of time. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about now. So what I'm going to do right now, before I go into the Taz, is review some basic halachas of kavush that we did in Hilchas Taaruvot Siman Kuf Hei. A very good, important review, because I can show you where this can come in handy even today. This can be a possibility. It could happen. It's not that we do kavush all the time, but what we may not think is kavush can be kavush. Okay, so that's why I think it's a good idea to go over the halachas of kavush. So what is kavush? Kavush means that two items, one example of kavush is two items, one is isser and one is heter, are soaked together. So we can, I guess, transfer the word kavush as being soaked or immersed together in some sort of liquid. And they are there together for a number of hours or a number of days. So there's no heat involved, but because of the fact that these two items are together in close proximity through a medium, some sort of medium, let's call it a liquid, rabbis tell us, the chachamim tell us that kavush is the equivalent of kemevushal. It has the effect, a similar effect, as bringing about tam. The iser will go into the heter will absorb the iser, in the same way it happens in the bishul. And it seems to be that most of the poskim hold that this is a din deoraisa, that kavush is kemevushal. The only thing that is not deoraisa is, of course, basar b'chalav, that it happens through kavush, because then you need real bishul. Everybody agrees with that, pretty much everybody. But
I think I understood what you meant. You meant that the isser and the heter soaking the isser of kavush is the oraisa.
Right.
Its equivalence to bishul is not the oraisa. Now it's where bishul is aser, and now you want.
Well, there's no isser to be mavashel, isser and heter.
I'm saying where bishul is the
Or
isser.
to be kavush isser the heter. Right.
No, but the kavush in itself, where you have an isser and heter, where you're being kavush.
Right.
Like you said, most opinions hold it's the oraisa.
Right.
A different situation is where the isser is bishul, and you're doing kavush.
Right.
There, because the isser was bishul and not kavush,
right.
So there, the kavush isn't bishul de rabbanan and not the oraisa. The kavush is like by basar b'chalav.
Sure, like by basar b'chalav.
Right. That's what you meant, right?
Yes. Yeah, with by basar b'chalav, you do need real bishul to bring about the isser of basar b'chalav through bishul. In other words, kavush would not be like bishul.
So it's not asa d'oraisa.
It's not asa d'oraisa. It's still asa d'rabbanan.
It's considered like a bishul d'rabbanan.
Right.
And over there, where you have hisser and hitter, it's not a question of comparing it to bishul. It's not the bishul that's aser. Kavush itself is aser d'oraisa regarding hisser and hitter being kavush.
Yes,
together.
that's correct. Now there is a machlekes, and we won't get into every little machlekes, but there is a machlekes. Negabi, this kavush, does this apply to every liquid, water too? Or is it only to tzir and chometz and things of that nature?
That was my question.
Yeah, right? So we hold, that's the halacha, that kavush is even in water. Not as some understand it to be, that it's only in the very, very spicy kind of solutions like brine, right? Like tzir, which comes from different sources, whether it's fish or vinegar, especially the strong vinegar. Because we remember we had a question about the mechaber's shita. It appears to be contradiction, and I think it was the Bach that explains that there's a difference between strong vinegar and regular vinegar. So anyway, so there's a machlokes about that. Kavush bringing about iser onto heter through the medium called kavush. Does that take place in every kind of liquid, even water? And the answer is halacha l'maisa. We hold yes. It includes water. All right. How about the time? How much time is needed to bring about kavush? That's also a machlokes. In machlokes rishonim. The Rosh and others hold that the shear is me'es le'es, in regular water. In Seir and Choymetz, we learned in Hilchos Aruvos that the shear would be a lot less. Apparently the brine, the salt, especially the salt in the brine, causes the solution to heat up quickly. And you have the effects of 24 hours in water. In less time, in a few minutes, about 6 minutes, I think we said, in Seir and Choymetz. All right. So, but the Rosh says that otherwise, if it's not Seir and Choymetz, what we need is 24 hours. There's an interesting Mordechai, and he doesn't say it from his own. I think he brings down somebody else. He says no. And he learns it out from somewhere. And I think it has to do also over there with the wine of Goyim. That 3 days are required. He holds, and he learns it out from that sugya of yain, of wine, with the barrels, that 3 days are required for the kavush to actually work itself through. For mine, just for mine, yeah.
But over there it's wine, actually. In the Gemara,
yes.
It's wine.
Over there it's talking about wine. Yeah, no, it's the raya is coming from that sugya regarding wine.
And over there, what he's saying is, if it's been soaking for 2 hours, then if a goy used it, because now it's saturated.
Right, that's what we're going to be talking about today, saturation.
Yeah.
That's one of the dinim that I want to talk about. So I'm giving you this introduction.
Yeah, okay.
No, good. So I'm giving you this introduction that is that this Mordechai of 3 days takes it from that sugya. Yeah. So you know about that sugya. Good. Yeah. Halacha l'maisa, the Torah and the Shuchan Aruch, the Ramah, they hold that the shear is me'es le'es, if it's water. Now, with kalim, as far as this was kavush with food items, together in water. What about something that is being kavush in a keli? There's 2 kinds of kavush in a keli. Either the keli already has a bliya of iser, and you're putting heter in that keli, and it's sitting there 24 hours. And the other form is iser that is being immersed in your pots and pans at night. There was was in your home, a kosher pot, but there's iser sitting there. Will it affect the keli or not? Now, in this sugya, as far as does kavush affect kelim or not, and does it affect any kind of keli, there's a machlokes too. If does it affect metal, or is metal only affected through bishul or not? But there's no need for us to get into that machlokes right now, because we're going to be, for the most part, dealing now with klei cheres, earthenware, and glass. And I have a reason why I want to include glass. Very interesting idea behind it. And porcelain, I guess, China. But there is, just for your information, there is a diyun, there is a whole discussion about whether the kavush affects the kelim in the same way or not. If you look at the halacha, you look at the Pri Megadim, we hold that, of course, especially in the Pri Megadim says after me'es le'es, there's no question about it. He says after me'es le'es, he's medayek, there's no question about it, that the iser will affect the keli. In other words, if you were koivish iser in a pot of kelim, in a pot of heter, that iser will be mavliya, right? The time of the iser into the kelim in the same way that this would have happened through bishul.
Okay. This mavliya in the kelim, this tam ke'iker is also done through being for kibush. Is it also tam ke'iker? We say generally is the raisa. That's when the absorbed and the mavliya is cooking.
Right.
Now, what if the take through kibush, like you said?
Right.
Does that pot now, the bliya of that pot, still have a status of iser d'oraisa?
Yes, it does. Yes.
Interesting.
Right.
Interesting. Is there machlokes or everyone agrees?
No, everybody agrees with that. There was something similar. There was a similar question about that in Basar b'chalav. There was an interesting question about that in Basar b'chalav. I don't recall it right now. That through kavush, which is a derabbanan, nevertheless, what's the din of the bliya?
Because where it can become a problem,
right,
is that if something is already aser this bliya,
right,
and now let's say you boiled milk in a pot that had kibush of meat, right?
Right.
and now that milk falls into another pot.
Okay.
If that kibush, if the tam ke'igir was deoraisa,
But it's tam, remember, it's tam.
if the tam ke'igir
Sure.
is deoraisa, so the milk became hanan.
Right.
So according to those that hold that hanan, once it becomes hanan, it's an isser and not basar b'chalav type of isser. If that milk now pours into meat, it's only an isser that was absorbed in the meat, and not an isser that makes meat hanan, because that milk is now hanan.
Yeah.
But if it's only the rabbanan, then that milk absorbed in the meat could make that meat hanan, even though that milk was an isser, because it was only an. So it could make a difference in some situations.
It could be possible. You have to think about that. Yeah. All right. So we have two oifanim, two ways of looking at kavush and kalim. One is isser being sitting in your pot. It sat there overnight. You know, somebody by mistake put it there, whatever, and you come and see it's been here for a while. No heat was involved. Nevertheless, it's mavliya. We hold it's mavliya. It's tam into that pot.
But it has to be liquid
Now,
in there. It has to be liquid in there.
Yes, of course. In order for it to be kavush, there has to be liquid. So this is all cold. That's the chidush of kavush, that it's all cold. It's water. Nevertheless, it's sitting there for a number of hours, let's say 24 hours, according to everybody. It's mavliya, the isser and the keli. Now what? Now we have another little machloikis, a little one. Okay, now that we have an isser in the pot,
How do we get it out?
No, forget about that. Now, let's say somebody by mistake actually went ahead and cooked in that pot. Do you need shishim keneged the whole kdera, the ovia kdera, the things there, or just would it be sufficient to klipa, like some would hold? How much is kavush actually mavliya in the doifen kdera, in the walls of the kdera? I mean, we say it's like bishul, and a lot of poskim hold it's like bishul, meaning like bishul in every respect. And therefore, you would need 60 against the whole thing, which means you have a problem if you need to do that, if you need to figure that.
Another question
Right?
that
Yeah.
should be asked is,
Yes.
depending on the proportion last week,
Yes.
between water.
Well, of course, whenever you are able to figure that out, if you're able to figure out how much isser is in the pot because of how much was cooked,
Then
then you have it
so
easy.
The maximum is the quantity of the isser.
That would always
But
be the
now
case.
if you have, let's say, a third of the overall volume in the was the isser, and 2/3 were water.
Right.
So now I would think that you would only need to have 60 against a third of the walls of the pot, because 2/3 what was mafliya in the walls of the pot was water.
Yeah, but remember, that's true, but it
Depends on the
depends on
proportions.
if you hold Chanan B'Shari Surim or not.
But that's the Rabbana.
But that's the Rabbanon. So
But
you
we're
could be
talking about the
Metzaref.
being an Doraisa.
You could be Metzaref that. That's, in other words, if you have an issue with that, how much was it? And you had a lot of water, you could be Metzaref that. That's not only the Rabbanon anyway. Yeah, so that would be a good point. If you had a lot of water versus a little bit of this, so you don't have to, even though it's Chanan, in Sharon Surim, the water becomes treif too, and the whole thing is nivla. There are times that even the Ramah, I believe we said, Behefsed Meruba would say, you could be soimech. There may be some shitas that you could be soimech or be metzarev this as a heter too. That if there was linas lailab itself, would be sufficient to be doing some tam gam. You wouldn't have to wait a meis leis. In other words, you can be metzarev heterim in this case. Yeah, interesting. It's a midrabanon only. So anyway, so that's a separate machloket of how much is the kavush actually mavliya in the kli itself. That's good to know. I think it's the Taz mashma from the Rash, but it would be only a klipa. But that's later on in Yain Nesach. I think that's why I saw it. Here he doesn't mention that, but over there. But otherwise, it's mashma from everyone else. I think the Isra Heter that you need shishim keneged the whole kli too. Even though the Shach speaks about it in Hilchas Yain Nesach too, that over there it seems like the Mechaber himself says you might need less. But that's only because he says there is less than the meis le'es. If it's less than the meis le'es, you wouldn't need shishim keneged the whole thing. You would be you would be allowed to be lenient and only keneged the klipa.
So there's a lot of you.
Yeah, there are. That is a possibility because we hold like that actually. In Taaruvot, we did learn about that. That kavush that is not a meis le'es. What would be the requirement just in case if it was meis le'es, you have a problem. Right? The Pachos Mishu Zelo Nesala Kedei Klipa, the Mechaber says. Because in some cases it's Hadocha is sufficient. Here in Mechaber says that if it was less than Meis La'es, a Klipa would still be required. In other words, we find that you can get away with a Klipa by Kovush sometimes. That's good to know. Okay. Now, what about the other way around? So Isur was in a keli, the keli absorbed. Question was, how much does it answer if you eventually cook? Will you need shishim connected the whole thing or connected the klipa? But what about the other way around? This was interesting. What if you had Isur, a pot of Isur, ben yoima, and now you were kovesh your own food. You wanted to make, what do you call it? Eingemach.
It's pickled.
Pickled, exactly. Right? So pickled requires a certain amount of time, spices and whatever, but let's not worry about the spices right now. You're being kovesh heter in a pot of Isser. And we said that apparently this will cause problems too. I mean, that's how we hold, at least, that this will be a problem too. Why? Because it will absorb the tam and Isser of the Kdera, right? In the same way that kovesh is mavliya, according to some, into the pot, it's also extracting from the pot. Come along the Shach and Taz, and here they're in agreement. And they say, wait a minute, we have a problem with this. If you remember from Hilchos Taaruvot, they said, in this scenario, where the heter is the one that's being nichbash in a kli of Isser, how could the heter ever become Asr? Kovesh takes 24 hours. And by the time 24 hours have elapsed, the tam in that pot has become pogum. Remember that one? That was a like we say in Yiddish, a chap. Good.
Yeah.
And that's the way they hold. From what I recall, that's the way they hold it. That shouldn't be a problem with the Evid. What does everybody else do with this he'ora? In other words, with this, it's a very, very good point.
Sure.
So you have various shitas who tackle this. You need to tackle it in different ways. Some say, well, the Tam of Gam only happens after Me'es La'es. And the kovesh already has happened right at the end of Me'es La'es. You hear that?
Yeah.
They try to say, yeah, you're right, but it's not. The Tam of Gam is after, the kovesh has already. Anyway, so others have a problem with this too. But just so you should know, the Shach and Taz, and I think the Pri Megadim said you can rely on this, if you need to. I think Behev said, I forget already, the Tzorech, you could definitely, Shach and Taz, they both say that shouldn't be B'di'evet, at least B'di'evet, not a problem, because at the end of the day, the kovesh takes 24 hours. And remember, kovesh, if you remember from Taaruvot, it has to be continuous. You can't 24 hours continuous. You can't take it, you put it in,
Right.
take it out, put it in, take it out. Remember that?
Right.
It has to be continuous. For this kovesh to actually happen, it takes a certain amount of time. Now, what we've seen so far is that kovesh takes time. Kovesh does do something. It does have kovesh k'mevushal. Okay? It affects things differently. The kelim are affected somewhat differently, apparently, even though we hold that they are affected in the same way that food is affected, but there is an apparent difference between how foods interact through kavush and what this immersion does to the walls, to the keli. And how much time it is, of course, is still a machlokes. We hold me'es la'es, but perhaps it could happen in less amount of time. We know that it happens in less amount of time through vinegar and things like that. So now the question will be,
So if it's a case of less amount of time, then the Taz and the Shach.
right, exactly,
So
yeah,
the
right.
And another question, please.
Yeah.
Now, if the Tam was absorbed not in the, but in a head that is pickled together with another,
Right.
do we say in such a case also the 10 Tam of 24 hours, or do we say because it's
What's your example? You have
instead of the pot having absorbed it, a fish head has absorbed some taste from a treifa fish. This is a kosher fish.
Right.
And the fish head is now soaked with
no,
herring.
no.
No, we don't say tam ten tam nifka. On this tam that's absorbed in the
Oh,
carp. A carp absorbs some taste from a crab.
Oh, I see. You're talking about this in Tam Lefgam.
Right.
I thought you were asking about kovush. See, kovush does not have the power to take out the tam of the fish and put it in. Remember?
Of the fish and
Remember, what you're asking, I'm getting back to the Tam Lefgam in a moment. What you're asking to happen is that the kovush should extract the tam from the fish and be mavliyah also. Kovush cannot do both peulos.
if I have a heter and an isser together,
But it's not a real isser. It's a heter that has a tam of isser in it. It's an isser balua, in your example.
well, it's not even an isser balua. It's only isser balua would be the mamashis.
No, okay, let's say just taste, regardless, right?
Yeah, I'm saying just
So
taste.
kavush is not so powerful. When we're talking about real kavush, is isser real gufa shel isser with heter, where all you need is one pe'ula,
I
not two
have a question.
pe'ulas. Right.
So a pot is a worse case than a food when both of them Leah or Bulea some is. Let's say I had a fish cooking in a pot with a crab, and now I'm being koivish some herring together with that fish in the same pot. The pot will usher because of the taste mavliya of the crab, and the fish will not usher the herring?
No, one more time. The isser is being kavush in a pot, the pot will absorb.
No, listen.
Right.
A crab and a carp were together cooked in a pot.
Cooked. Right.
The pot absorbed taste from the crab.
That's correct.
The carp also absorbed taste
Yes,
from
that's
the crab.
correct.
Now, the pot is cleaned very well.
Right.
And now someone within 24 hours, before 24 hours are
Right.
over, puts herring and the carp in the same pot.
Kavush.
With water,
With water.
cold.
Right.
Now the pot will usher the herring because of the absorption of crab.
Right.
But the carp will not usher the herring because
Not
of the absorption
necessarily.
of crab taste in the carp.
Right, because you
So
need
pot
two.
is worse than
Well,
the
it's
carp.
not worse. It's how many pe'ulas are required.
Why is it more pearls required by the carp than by
From the pot, all you need is one pe'ula to come out.
But the pot also absorbs it
Right.
simultaneously.
Right. Yeah. I see what you're saying. So you're trying to say that if this is also a belia,
Right. I've got the same belia in the pot as in the head of the carp.
yeah.
Why would one usher and the other not? Because after all, the same 24 hours do not only extract the isser from the pot and transfer it to the herring, they also transfer whatever isser might be in this liquid.
Okay, good
from
point. Let's
into the
remind me.
pot.
I'll look into it.
Okay.
Instead of trying to figure it out
Yeah,
right now,
sure,
because
okay.
we're
Yeah,
not
yeah, absolutely.
right.
Yeah,
We're
yeah.
not dealing with COVID, but it's a good point.
Yeah.
But from what I recall, remember when we spoke about klisheni and kovush, and it could be only klisheni. Maybe I'm mistaken. Klisheni for sure does not have the koyach to do both, to be boleh and to be maflit. So we have to actually look into kovush, because from what I recall, kovush may not have that ability. Because remember what we said something else about kovush. There's a machlokes. Let's say you put something kovush, a heter, kovush in the pot of isser, but only half of it is sticking out. Half of it is sticking out. The rest of it is in the water. Kovush is not so strong like bishul as to say the whole piece becomes aser, even the piece that's outside the water. That you remember, right? Only that which is in the water, that's really kovush, is affected. So you can cut it in half. So therefore, remind me, we'll look into that another time. A good point, because if there is a difference, why should there be a difference, even though it appears to be two peulas? But anyway, we did say that with kalim there was a problem. In other words, with kalim there was not a consensus, just that we hold it sasser. All right. So now let's go to the Taz. The Taz here in Siman Sadi Gimel, after learning the halacha of a pot that was used for meat cannot be used for chalav, obviously, or the other way around.
Which tells us
This is a long Taz, Sivkot and Beis. But it's not in the very beginning of the Sivkot and Beis, it's on the next Omud. Okay, so I'm going to go quickly through it. He brings down here, it's very nice the way he goes through the whole thing. He brings down the Beis Yosef, B'Shem Agol Sharedura, that Hiter Ri Halovan, he was matir, the Ri Halovan was matir. The following example, Basar shenizbashel b'kdeiro shel chalav, meat that was cooked in a pot of milk. V'hoya b'cholav kol halayla, there was milk in this pot of milk, an entire night sitting. Okay, and the Ri Halavan says like this: Omar kivan debolea pam achas ubeis v'gimel mikoidem lachen lo bola belayla klal v'cholav shebalo mikoidem lachen lo nesa denoisen tam levgambo. Ad kan l'shano. What was his case? His case is a Melicha pot that was used. Somebody used it by mistake to cook fleishiks. Now, this Melicha pot, the milk that it had absorbed through cooking was already a couple days old. Great. But there was one little catch here. And that's what brought this question to his attention. The catch was that the night before, the balabusta stored milk into this pot, but she didn't cook it. She just had it sitting in cold, the tzoinen into this pot. So this is a form of kavush here. We're obviously dealing with kavush. Otherwise, what's the problem here? You get a question, you get this question, and you say, well, it hasn't been used, it hasn't been cooked in the last 24 hours. Good, nice and time. No. He says, wait a minute. We do have a problem here. She stored cold milk in this pot, did not cook into it, last night.
How long did she store it?
Oh, it's not clear. He just says kol halayla. But it's not exactly clear how many hours does he...
But kol halayla can't be first.
Oh. So Pashup Pshat, that's the way the Taz learns. So the Taz says from the Lashon, if you pick apart this language, it appears, let's get to the heter first, and then I'll explain. The Taz, so the Real Oven says, in that case, even though it contained milk, right? It contained milk for a number of hours, which apparently is some sort of a problem. And now we know what the problem is because of kavush, right? So don't make little of that. It is a problem. It contained milk. However, he says, you know what? Forget about that. I have some chidush to tell you. Forget about the kavush. Yes, kavush can be a problem here. But this pot was used numerous times, and there's something called saturation. I like your word, because that's really the exact correct word when in dealing with these halachas here. There's something called saturation of a keli. And when a keli is saturated at some point, and we don't know what that point yet is, he says, Pamachos beis v'gimel. So he's giving away a little bit over here, once, twice, three times. He says, it's pretty saturated. So what happens now when you store milk into that pot, even though it's within a few hours ago, and you might say, it's kavush kemevushal, and it's tam, and it's no longer tam l'vgam, because the old stuff is tam l'vgam, yes, but the new stuff is not tam l'vgam. He says, don't worry about the new fresh milk that was sitting there. It wasn't cooked, first of all. And even if it was cooked, well, it's a little different, but we're not talking about cooked, because we're going to see cooking is more serious than kavush. It's sat there, but this pot is saturated. And you know when a pot is saturated? You put some more milk in there, no new milk will have been absorbed into that pot. So basically, after it's all rinsed out, the balabusta came and cooked her favorite goulash in this pot. She doesn't have to worry about it, because the old milk is nice and tam l'vgam. The new milk that sat there, the pot is saturated, it didn't affect it. What does that tell us? Two dinim here are very important. There's something called saturation, which is important for us. We're going to learn a little bit about that. Plus, it tells us that milk sitting in a pot for a number of hours can cause a problem to that pot. In other words, had there not been saturation, there was no heat here. It just sat there. It would be a problem. We went through the introduction of kavush, and we can see why there can be a problem. We don't know details of how many hours exactly, right? We don't know all the details, but we see that had there not been saturation, he would have said, yes, since the milk sat there for a number of hours, even though it's cold and not heat, if the balabusta went ahead and cooked in it meat, it would be a problem. You're lucky that this is a pot that has been used several times, so that it's so saturated that the milk that was there just a couple hours ago is not a big deal. That's the Rihalovon's shaila. The Taz brings it down. Now he makes comments on it.
Can we at this point then establish that at least for the milk is considered
not kibush, kavush, because kibush is to conquer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So kavush, well, the milk conquers in the pot.
Yeah.
For the girls of kavush, the milk is considered. Because if you recall, we had what we had before the problem that the liquid from the exposed piece of meat should only usher because there's no liquid and to usher complete water involved. There must be.
Yes.
When we said we were talking, but here the milk is kavush considered.
Yeah, but here it's not. Yeah, here it's liquid. Here we're talking about the keli right now. We're not talking right.
Which is even more far fetched.
Right.
There's no.
But it's but we're dealing with the liquid, right? Now, the Taz explains first of all that this chidush or this halacha is taken, of course, from Siman Kuf Lamed Hey. It's based on the logics of the halachas in Kuf Lamed Hey by Yain Nesach, And it's, of course, it's the Makor. The Makor of this is a Gemara in Avodah Zarah Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis, according to the Pshat of Rashi. There's a machlokes that Rashi and Tosfos in how to understand a certain Gemara. The Gemara there talks about cups, what appears to be cups of cheres, that the guy used to drink from. So he used it once, he used it twice, he used it 3 times. So the question is, what do you have to do for them? In other words, they've been used. But if they've been used several times, perhaps it's not a problem, not because of saturation. So that sugya, depending on how you learn it, has a little bit to do with the halachas in yain nesach or stam yainam, and with wine, there's more of a chumrah. If you put your own wine into those barrels, there's more of a chumrah than if you put beer, because what wine does to the other wine is more beneficial than what wine does to the beer. In other words, so even in Hilchas Yain, there are differences as to actually what you ended up putting in those barrels, what the wine will do to it. And in some things the Chachamim were meikol, they were lenient, and in some they were more machmer. But anyway, those are halachas legabi yain. But I just wanted you to know that where it's coming from and where it is discussed more in depth. All right. Yeah.
How is it possible what the material is being absorbed?
Very good, yes.
The material itself.
Right.
The dimensions of it.
Yes, that's right.
So how can you say one would come up with anything?
Yeah, so that's what we have several poskim that talk about this and say that there may be a difference between klei cheres and other kelim, and some say there is no difference. So that's what we're going to see right now. Because this sugya is taken, at least if you learn like Rashi, to be understood that the klei cheres earthenware are quicker to absorb. Not only is there an issue of saturation, which can apply, by the way, to anything except for glass, okay? Not only is saturation something that can apply anywhere almost, because that's just a fact that it can happen, but klei cheres, apparently, if you learn like Rashi, and some points can learn that pshat, is that they're quicker to absorb. They're so thin and soft that you can put your liquid in them, and within a number of hours, there's even one sheet that I think the Pri Megadim said even could be 1 hour. It could just be that keli has already absorbed. Remember, we're not even talking about bishul right now. We're just talking about putting something betzoinen, and we're talking about now klei cheres for the time being, not metal. The klei cheres, apparently, according to some, is softer material, like you said, and could absorb much faster. And that's what the Torah says. Till when do they absorb? Till they become saturated. In other words, if you had water in them, and they used to do this, if you put water in them 3 days in a row, once, swallowed, took it out. Once again, took it out. Once again, 3 times water, mislays, it has becomes fully saturated. This is, according to many, this would be for sure saturation. And that is why this is also used as a means of kashering glass, that the Ashkenazim are machmer on Pesach, that if you really need to, you can do it by using it 3 times. Or Hagala doing its Hagala 3 times, or putting it into water 3 times. It's taken from this sugya. This is the makor for that. That keboloi kach polto, in the same way that it can become saturated in 3 times, you need to take it out in 3 times. So that's what. Now, glass. Let's talk about glass real quickly. Glass is different than everything else. Glass does not really absorb. It's a question. It's a suffix, but we hold that when it comes to kavush, at least, glass is not a problem. So that's the halacha how we hold. Yad Yehuda thing brings it down that kavush is not shaykh by glass. It may be shaykh by other materials. By glass, it's not a problem. That's how we hold.
Even by Ashkenaz.
Even by Ashkenaz. Comes along the question that why are the Ashkenazim machmer on Pesach with glass? And the answer is, it's a chumrah for Pesach. So Ashkenazim who are machmer Pesach for glass, not to use glass, not to kasher glass, except for that method that can sometimes be used, it's only because of Pesach. Pesach is a special chumrah. But in Ochiname, kavush does not apply to glass. So something that was sitting in glass for days, jars, it's not a problem. Yeah.
If you have glass plates and glassware,
Right.
you would only need one.
That's theoretically, you're right. That's 100% correct. Because it doesn't really absorb. But we don't.
Yeah. We don't, but just take this to extent.
Sfardim don't either.
Sfardim do. In other words, we don't have. They don't use the same set for both.
Sfardim do the same set.
No.
It's purely theoretical, though. You would have to
I know
wait
Sfardim would do. What they're doing is right.
Yeah. No, we don't use it for the same. No.
Just on a theoretical level.
You can.
You could use it for the same. Would you have to wait or could you use it right after each other?
After each other. Yeah. Yeah, it's not a problem. Glass is.
Well, the whole point is it doesn't absorb. That's the difference.
Right.
The question.
But that we said that legabi kovush. Only legabi kovush. Legabi bishul, obviously, we're machmir.
Yeah, if you were to move ashel in,
right?
You don't, okay, simply.
Yeah.
But if it's a
heat,
that's
not a problem. Yeah, it wouldn't be a problem as much. But we're machmir. We separate because of the heat that is sometimes used. Hot foods, bishul. Here, I'm just talking about kovush. So kavush is not, it wouldn't be a problem, but zchuch is Pesach. We're machmir because Pesach is a chumrah, that's all. Anyway, it comes along the Taz. It says like this. Okay, so what do we see so far? That based on what the Torah says later on, the kelim shel cheres are thinner, they do absorb faster, but they do absorb until they become saturated. And therefore, the Rialovin says that here, the case of milk sitting there does not present a problem, does not pose a problem, because that pot has been saturated. Because we're talking about new pottery, and that pottery was used several times. I'm sorry, we're talking about old pottery. The pottery was used several times, and therefore it's saturated. Had it been new pottery, that would be different, because it could still absorb. So the Taz makes a very important point. It says, that which the real Lavan was matir over here is only because the milk sat there overnight. Had the milk sat there me'es le'es, I would not be matir it. The Taz says very clear. If you go all the way to the bottom, it says, had this milk sat there an entire me'es le'es, even if it's saturated, I would aser it. Even though the levush is one of the only ones who holds that even if it's sat there me'es le'es, it's still mutter because of saturation. So what's the question? Why does the Taz say that the me'es le'es makes a difference? Saturation is saturation. Why, if it sat there a whole night, would it be any different? So he explains very nicely. He says, we hold, after all, kavush is kemovushal, right? What does that mean? Kavush kemovushal, we hold that if something sat somewhere, in some pot for 24 hours in a liquid, it has a koach. It has a similar koach to bishul. Now you tell me, he says, does saturation affect the pot if you're cooking in it? No. Nobody ever will tell you that. Most poskim will not. If you cook in a pot that has istreif, that has been saturated 100 times, and it's a ben yomer, will anybody tell you, but it's saturated? No. Everybody will tell you, you're cooking in a treif pot, you're cooking, then whatever you're cooking is going to become...
You need 60.
You need 60, otherwise it's going to become treif. But wait a minute, but that pot is saturated. No, saturation is not something to consider when you're dealing with bishul. Why? Because what does bishul do to that, to the blias? Ben yomer, of course we're talking ben yomer, right? It takes it out. Bishul is so powerful that it actually takes out the blias there, right, and puts it into the heter. Okay. Now, wait a minute. I didn't explain myself well. Well, obviously it's going to take it out, and obviously that he's going to take it out. That's not the problem. It always does that. The chiddush is by bishul that even though the old tam, okay, is noisen tam lefgam, if you cooked again within 24 hours, it will absorb it again and then come out in the next bishul. One more time. Of course, bishul takes out blias. That's not the problem. The point is those blias, if they're ben yoiva, they always come out. What we're tackling here's the following situation. If you were to have cooked, and your cooking already is not ben yoiva, fine, and the pot is saturated, okay, saturated, and now you come again and cook again in it, the one that you're not allowed to cook, right, the treif or the basar, even though it's saturated, it will have become absorbed somehow, even though it's saturated. So when you go ahead and cook now your chalav or whatever, it's going to come out. So the question is, what's happening in bishul that is not really happening in our case here in the Taz? That's why the Taz says you better be careful that it did not sit there me'es le'es. So why does the me'es le'es make such a big difference? So I'm trying to explain it this way. So he says, just like by bishul, saturation does not make a difference, and you understood why, right? It went in, it will come out, even though it's already saturated. The reason why that does not help, saturation does not work in bishul, is because even though it's true, it's full, the act of bishul, what it accomplishes is that it extracts a little bit of what's there to make room for the new stuff. When you're cooking again, it's saturated? Yeah, it is. It's a fact, saturated. Yeah, but the heat of the cooking, what it accomplishes is it will remove some of the old stuff there and allow some of the new stuff to come in. So by the time you come along a few hours later and says, oh, I just cooked, but it's not a problem, right? It's saturated. No, it is a problem. Even though it was saturated, the milk didn't sit there. It was actually cooked again. And when you cook it again, you're making room for the new stuff to come in, because some of the old stuff is coming out. So the Taz says that's why kavush me'es le'es. In the halacha that was asked to the real Lavan, it was not me'es le'es, it was only a kol alayla. That's why he says it's mutter, because of saturation. But had it been there me'es le'es, it would have done the same thing as bishul did. It would have taken out some of the old and taken in some of the new. You see the difference between why me'es le'es would make a difference? So here the chiddush is, very important chiddush. You have milk sitting in the pot, not even being cooked, and it's a me'es le'es, it will be a problem. And it will be not only a problem for the kli, the chiddush is that even if the kli was already saturated, me'es le'es would undo it in a sense, because it's going to take out some of the old to make room for some of the new. And once you make room for some of the new, the saturation is no longer, it cannot help you. You go ahead and cook in that Melicha pot, you have a problem. So
unless what you're cooking is milk.
Yeah. Right? So did I make myself clear? Yeah, that's the ikar chidush of the Taz, one of the chidush of the Taz, that me'es le'es would not, the real Lavan's heter would not apply, only if it was overnight. Now, how about the time, the shir zman, that the chalav should be allowed to sit in there? What actually is, doesn't really say how many hours for the chalav to actually be there, to be considered absorbed into the kli. From the Marshal it's mashma 12 hours. From Megodim says even 1 hour may be enough. The gabi klei cheres earthenware, that it was already saturated, the Taz seems to hold that saturation only occurs after 3 times of use. From Megodim, I think I read somewhere says 2 times. And later on, I think in Taaruvot, the Pri Megadim says something about if it's sat in the klei cheres 6 hours, it's already saturated. So that's an important point, because the Nekudas HaKesed, the Shach, does not agree that klei cheres and metal have any differences of how long it takes for them to absorb. The klei cheres should absorb quicker, because according to this Taz, the Taz is not only telling us a chiddush about the difference between me'es le'es in a couple hours, he's also pointing out that klei cheres seem to be absorbing quicker, and they could present a problem. Because if something absorbs quicker, and you went ahead and cooked in it, it's going to be a problem. If something sat in your metal pot for a number of hours, milk, it's not going to be a problem. It shouldn't be a problem. If for it to be a problem, it would need a me'es le'es. But apparently, according to some, if klei cheres, it may happen much quicker. So if it sat there You may have to be concerned about it, even though it wasn't cooked in it. It just sat there. It already absorbed. Yes, of course, there is something called saturation, but that's a different question. How long does it take for it to be saturated? So that's a separate question. Saturation is true. I mean, it's a fact. After a while. The only thing is that if you went ahead and were koivish in that which was saturated, you don't really gain that much. In other words, in the case that we brought here, even though something...
If you're an isser.
An isser. In other words, even though it was already saturated, if you went ahead and koivish something within a couple of hours, that saturation... in other words, and later on you were koivish heter, that saturation will not help you. Like our example here, because me'es le'es at least, if you did it me'es le'es, you took out some of the old stuff and you allowed some of the new stuff to come in. So here we have several chidushim, several important dinim. One about kavush, of course, that can happen even in cold, and that we know already in various scenarios. The question is, of course, how long it takes. We hold it takes me'es le'es for the most part, but that's as far as being absorbed into the pot, or an ordinary pot, or absorbing from the pot. Apparently, there are some that hold that with the klei cheres, kavush, this mechanism called kavush, may happen within a number of hours, or much quicker. So there's something to be concerned about. Saturation, how much is required for it to be saturated, is also machloekes of whether it's 3 times or less.
But the gabe kavush,
What?
the gabe kavush doesn't really help us. With respect to kavush, saturation.
No, if it's not a benyoimo anymore, it still helps us. When we said kavush, when we said saturation does not help, is an example of where you had something within a me'es le'es that sat there for, let's say it sat there for overnight. That pot, like here, the example here, was already saturated, and you are koivish now again. So if it's only sitting there 8 hours, okay, it's saturated. I don't care if it was just there a couple hours ago and there's no me'es le'es, there's not pogum, because it's saturated anyway. So it never absorbed it. But if I put something that is kavush over me'es le'es, it's always going to be a problem, unless the bliyas there are completely pogum, right?
It doesn't help me that it's when I come into din of kavush is after 20 hours.
Oh yeah, that's the case of the shachin taz.
So
Yeah, if you have isser in the pot that's there, and you didn't do anything in the meantime, you just put heter right away, and by the time the 24 hours goes by, you're saying that heter becomes pogum. Is that what you're saying?
No, that wasn't my intention. The intention was that duration of the pot,
Right.
Whether the pot is saturated or not, does not make it. Once I'm talking about kavush, being something in there for a short period of time, as it becomes kavush, whether it's saturated.
Oh, I
or
see.
It's not saturated, then will apply.
Yes. Yeah, because as long as it's not noisen tam lef gam, it's going to absorb.
And if it is noisen tam lef gam, it's got nothing to do with saturation.
Exactly. That's true, yeah. Just that our case was talking about something that is saturated, but nevertheless, the Taz points out, if you're going to put something there for a number of hours, it still could be a problem. Because later on, right, if you are koivish, if you're going to put something there for me'es le'es, okay?
You're right, but for a different reason. You need the me'es le'es because without es le'es, kavush will not accomplish that whatever is in the pot affects the pot.
Right.
Regardless of saturated. You need the me'es le'es so that what's resting in the pot that's an isser will actually be absorbed by the pot.
Right.
If you have me'es le'es and it's purely water and no spices, then whatever is resting in the pot will not be absorbed in the pot if it's a brand new pot. Because it takes 24 hours for kibush to be like in the bashal.
Yeah, but unless the klei cheres. So that's where there's another machlekes. Will it absorb in less than 24 hours?
Okay.
In klei cheres only.
And
it could be a question.
How do we paskin?
Right?
How do we paskin?
No, but klei cheres that you have to be machmir, that you have to be careful.
So how many hours? 12 hours?
I guess, Marshal, yeah. Yes, he said that it could be even with 1 hour it would have absorbed already. It could be. In a klei cheres you have to be extra careful because it could be that it absorbs faster according to those shitas that hold. Nevertheless, everybody would agree with this saturation thing. That the only thing is that with the saturation will not help you if you went ahead again and did it the me'es le'es, because me'es le'es, as the Taz explained, will work like bishul. This new kavush of the milk is going to take out the old, take out some of the new. So you're going to go ahead and cook now. Just don't tell me a story about saturation anymore. But saturation may help me if it was less than 24 hours there. The next time around, when the balabas was put anywhere.
By anywhere I don't need it. Anywhere but the kli
metal,
cheres.
no, even by metal.
But in any type of kli that's not kli cheres, less than 24 hours will not accomplish the transfer of the taste lead. Only by kli cheres, less than 24 hours may do that. We said because there it's a machlokas by kli cheres.
Right.
So only by kli cheres, a saturation will help me in less than 24 hours.
Yeah, so what you're saying...
Because on the other side I don't need help. Because I need the 24 hours for anything to happen anyway.
Yeah, what you're saying is true. Apparently, where this could be more of a problem is in klei cheres. Yeah, because in klei cheres, that is where we see that some hold that the absorption can happen. And some absorption can happen.
And their saturation could help.
And their saturation.
My question is, doesn't the Taz hold that the absorption and what's in the happen in less than hours?
Yes, he does.
It's an ongoing process.
No, he holds. He does
even
hold.
Without heat.
In klei cheres, it happens. Sure.
Without heat.
Without heat.
So why would saturation help me then?
No, saturation after all.
By kli cheres.
So once you've reached the point of saturation,
they're still exchanging.
There's only exchanging if the next time around what you put there is for 24 hours or more.
So you're saying that in the period up to 24 hours there is no exchange?
No, in the period of up to 24 hours, if it's new pots.
No, if the kli cheres,
that's new.
If it's saturated, it can't be new. We're talking about the case of saturation. What is the saturation?
No, so nothing happens. Nothing happens.
Until 24 hours, nothing happens?
Exactly. That's the chiddush over here. That's the chiddush of saturation. That if it's in the chiddush of the head.
Nothing to do with saturation.
No. Something that was sitting there. That was the milk was sitting there in the case of the Taz. The milk was sitting there for overnight.
That is just 12 hours.
Right.
Just 1 hour.
Whatever. But the pot was already saturated.
Yes.
So we hold whatever sat there for 12 hours.
Yes. 12 hours now.
Yes.
1 hour.
No, 12 hours. It was overnight. Let's say.
But 12 hours by kli cheres is already mi'es le'es.
No, we're not saying that. The Taz only said that overnight.
But we said that we have opinions that 12 hours, even 1 hour.
No, that's that it absorbs.
Yeah.
That it begins to absorb. That you don't need kavush for it to happen. It can begin absorbing even in a number of hours. But once saturation has been reached, which everybody kimat holds, that you could reach that point after a number of times of using it, then whatever you put now for 4, 5, 6 hours will not go anywhere. It just won't. It's saturated. The exchange,
it still exchanges.
The exchanges only occur when you have 24 hours. When what will sit there now, will sit there for 24 hours.
Oh, by kli cheres we're talking about 12 hours.
No.
Kli cheres, 12 hours is already covered.
No. What I said was that by kli cheres, according to some who hold that it's thinner and softer, it tends to absorb within a number of hours. That is before it's saturated.
That's up to the point
Put aside saturation for a second.
Right.
Because it's confusing.
Right.
We have a kli cheres that has been previously used.
All right.
And has some isser.
Right. It has milk.
Now, a kli cheres absorbs faster than a metal pot.
Apparently, according to some,
And according to the opinion that it does, it's 12 hours.
Right.
So for them, 12 hours in kli cheres is like 24 hours in a metal pot.
Yes.
It's the same thing.
That's correct.
Because of the nature of the kli cheres, it's 12 hours instead of 24.
That's correct.
So if I want to say the general case, I can adjust for a kli cheres with 12 hours instead of 24 later. But then the general case is, unless I've reached the time limit of kavush, there is no exchange going on between the and its contents, ongoing. It takes 24 hours until the first molecules are exchanged. Or whatever, 12 hours back to kli 24 hours by metal pot.
There's only two situations. Mm-hmm. One is that a kli cheres may absorb faster, and we say
not a problem.
Be concerned with it. Be concerned with it. It's definitely
in a practical situation.
Yeah, be concerned with it. Now, once it has reached the point of saturation.
Put aside saturation for a second. I'm asking you a different question.
Okay.
I don't know about the saturation.
All right. Yeah.
I have a kli.
Right.
Which requires a certain amount of time.
Right.
Until I call the process that's happening in a kli kavush.
Okay.
By kli cheres it's 12 hours. buy a metal pot that's 24
That's correct.
hours. That's
yeah.
not my problem.
That's correct. Okay.
Now, until I have reached that time duration,
All right.
that duration
Sure.
that is required for kavush,
Right.
until I'm reached
Sure,
that
sure.
threshold, and I'm not looking at saturation right now.
Okay, go ahead.
Will there be an exchange between what's absorbed in the walls of the keli and what's slowly resting in there but hasn't reached the threshold of kavush yet?
No.
The exchange only begins after the threshold of kavush?
Yes, because there's two kinds of kavush. One is kavush being absorbed into a kli, into the walls, and one is kavush of something that is sitting in the pot, taking out what's from the walls. In other words, absorbing that which is coming out from the walls.
And that's the position of house.
Yeah, 1 second. Then there's actually a third kavush, a kavush of two things being immersed in the pot at the same time.
We're dealing right now the interaction between
Right.
the thing in the pot
Right.
and the walls of the pot. That was
Right.
our, because with two things in a pot, you don't have an Indian
Right.
situation.
So real kavush happens, we hold, real kavush happens after a me'es le'es. What does that mean? Not legabe the pots necessarily, but for the food item to become usher, that's sitting in the spot, it takes 24 hours. All right? Then we had a separate question about saturation. And saturation would, of course, impact clay hairs a little bit differently. Not that they both become at some point saturated, but it could happen that this gradual process of saturation is happening quicker in a clay hairs. Therefore, when will it be, what's the nafkamina? If I went ahead and cooked in this clay hairs, even though it just absorbed it for 6 hours, it didn't sit there for 24 hours, I may have a problem. If this milk sat in the metal pot for 6 hours, I don't have to deal with it. It never was absorbed into the pot. It did the clay hairs, but that's only a problem if I cook in it. Because I may be getting the tam out of the walls. But if it sits there afterwards, nothing will happen unless it sits there for 24 hours. Yeah. 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 In other words, you can't cook in it. In other words, if let's say somebody put milk in a jar, earthenware jar, it sat there for overnight. You rinsed it out. They never cooked in it, any milk. You can't cook flesh in there right now. Chachila. Right. There's some shit that said. No.
To 12?
Well, in other words, it appears to be that some shitas hold that it would have to be at least 12. Yeah. But some say even less. So you would have to be concerned about it. You know, when you're dealing with this situation, what do I do now? And remember, klicheres, you cannot make hagala to it, so it could be a problem. Good news is that if it's glass, you don't have to worry about kovush. That's why glass here is very interesting, because we use glass sometimes for a glass of milk. You know, a jar, the container is of glass, it's holding milk. You know, you don't have to worry about it. Fleishiks, melichiks, and things. You're not going to cook in it anyway, but if you want to be kovish something there right now that is meat, you don't have to worry about it.
You say something that is like glass?
So that's another question the poskim is glazed like glass or not?
Or like hairs.
Or like cheres. So that's another question.
Because it's glazed
Yeah, we're machmir that it's like cheres.
We hold it
We hold like it's like cheres unless it's a very, very thick glaze. And that's a question by Tevilas Kelim too. Do you have to be toivler or not?
Now, a glass item, something made of glass, non-glazed, to be toivel.
One more time?
Something made of glass
Yes.
that is non-glazed.
Yeah, regular glass,
Yeah,
yes.
to be
Glass and
toivel.
metal with toivel.
If it's glazed, it has to be toivel.
If it's earthenware, porcelain, glaze, you don't have to be toivel. Some take it without a bracha, depending how thick the glazing is.
So something that's earthenware needs to be toiveled, but if it doesn't...
No, earthenware does not need to be toivel.
Oh,
If it's
earthenware
glazed,
then it has to be
it
toiveled.
may have to be. We hold that you don't have to, unless it's a very expensive, thick glaze, very thick glaze that some people are machmir. So what some people do is they take it with something else that requires a bracha, and toivel at the same time.
So the glaze undoes the benefit of the
Earthenware,
the
right? Right.
Now, if
But for the most part, you don't have to worry about china. Most china that you buy does not require tevila.
But that also means that you have...
Well, it's a problem that that you can't make hagola to it if it was used for fleishiks. Yeah, you just inherited some dishes from your a relative that was not keeping kosher. It's a question. What do you do? So there's the heter that if it's over 12 months, even with earthenware, you may be able to rely on it. But
I know that there
Yeah.
are people on that.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah. So anyway, the good news at least is that kovish does not apply to glass, so this would not be an issue there. Okay, I think we'll stop. Yeah.